Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, PACS Migrations, equipping you with the most powerful migration platform in healthcare, presented by DataFirst. In a few moments, I'm going to pass things over to Bo Jones, President and CEO of DataFirst, and Bob Maskuliak, Chief Operating Officer. In the meanwhile, while you're getting into your seats, we want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day to be a part of today's webinar. In order to make this as interactive as we possibly can, we are going to be taking questions, live Q&A throughout the course of today's webinar, and then addressing them primarily at the end of the event. As you get in, I want to make sure that you can see and you can also hear us. So if you can, please do me a favor. In the chat, let us know that you can see our screen. And let us know where you're logging in from today. Where are you sitting? I'm in Youngstown, Ohio, and please just give us a heads up to say, hey, I can hear you and I can see you. Great. I got a hand up, so that lets me know. Grace in Georgia, thank you for dropping on in today. We are off and running. Long Island, New York, Phoenix, Arizona, Cy Falls, South Dakota. So with no further ado, Bo. We got them from all over the country today, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to pass this webinar off to you. Thank you very much for all the time you spent preparing for today's event on PACS migration. Bo, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the time and effort your team put this together. I know the efforts. And also want to thank everybody for attending today. Hey, if you sacrificed your lunch hour to be with us today, send me the bill. I'll pick up the tab. But look, our goal in hosting these educational webinars is really to focus on relevant business challenges impacting imaging enterprises today, and specifically how our Silverback workflow platform is empowering users to solve those issues and drive efficiency within their enterprise networks. And following last quarter's discussion, which was really around HL7 and intelligent prefetching, on the close of that, we received a really significant level of interest to learn more about the specific migration capabilities within Silverback. And honestly, as evidence to the number of attendees today, I think we would agree that this is an important area of interest and one that we, DataFirst, are uniquely qualified to answer and address. To this end, as Dennis mentioned, I have asked Bob Maskuliak to join us in this discussion. As we'll try to keep it high level, but there are times that migrations can move down into the technical aspects. So I've asked Bob to join us in that regard. So for those coming to the call today, you're probably coming with a reason. And I would suspect that you are either getting ready to do a migration, that you're in the middle of a migration, or you've just finished a migration. But if you've been in healthcare at any level around the imaging enterprise area, you have likely experienced one, perhaps more migrations. It's kind of a fundamental necessity when moving either away from a vendor or adding to an existing vendor or acquiring systems. We see that obviously in our environment where hospitals and enterprises are acquiring other centers, other hospitals, and that creates a business challenge of being able to incorporate those existing imaging enterprises to bring into their fold. And that typically requires some level of migration to accomplish that. I have said this many times as internal calls with our team that we have three things that I think make DataFirst very relevant and leading industry, and that is our people, our product, which is Silverback, and our processes. So whether you are engaging DataFirst to do what I'll call a turnkey migration, which is where we come in and we do everything from soup to nuts from beginning to end, or whether you are licensing the Silverback platform to do your own migration with your own internal resources, migration and the tool provided are really only half the battle, meaning bringing resources to the table and bringing what I refer to as industry-leading experts to drive and support you in those endeavors is important. DataFirst has over 40 migration engineers, developers, and project managers that are all part of effectively doing about 250 migrations a year, supporting our partners, as well as empowering our partners and direct customers to use our platform to do their own migrations. It's also in the process that's important. All of these have a tendency to be unique at some element in terms of a workflow. So we spend significant time, as noted here in the slide, of analyzing your environment, designing a solution that works, deploying and testing that solution, and ultimately transforming and meeting your strategic objectives in a migration. And that is part of what Silverback, our migration platform, will empower you to do as well. What's important to note is the very same tool that our engineers are using in the course of doing these turnkey migrations, this is exactly the same tool that we are licensing and empowering our partners in the industry to also use. So you're not getting a lighter version or a different version, you're getting the full-fledged version that our team is ultimately using. So with that kind of overview and introduction, hey, Bob, I want to bring you in and just start talking about the types of migrations, obviously, that some of our attendees are likely considering or involved in today.
Yeah, Bo, thanks. So as Bo mentioned, we're going to speak about the types of migrations that we frequently run into. One of the things about migrations, this is a topic we could talk about for hours, but we're going to cover at a high level the various types of migrations that we see. Start off with the most basic of all, a DICOM query retrieve migration. And, while I call it basic, certainly it has its own challenges. The speed and quality of the source system, old DICOM, aging storage, all those things are things to consider. And then I'm going to speak a little bit about file-based migration. We call them file share or hyper migrations. This is a DICOM migration, but instead of using the host application to retrieve the exam and simply send it along to the target system, we instead go to the stored DICOM files. And in some cases, they're not DICOM files, which we'll talk about in a minute. But and then what we do is we copy those DICOM files, or we become aware of where those DICOM files sit, and we go ahead and we move those along to the target. And one of the benefits of those types of migrations is it tends to not put a lot of stress on your production environment, which is a big challenge in migrations. I mean, most of the time people's legacy PACS systems have done a good job servicing their day-to-day needs, but when you try to pull 30, 40, 50,000 studies a day out of it, you basically put it out of business. File share / hyper migrations allow us to go ahead and work around that front end, thereby letting you maintain your legacy environment. And in many cases, they also allow us to complete the project faster. Oftentimes, what you'll find in those file share migrations is that the files are actually stored in a non-standard format. They may be blob files or tar files. What we have integrated into our Silverback engine is the ability to process those non-standard files effectively on the fly. So if we would point our tool at the file shares where these files sit, we extract them out, write the DICOM files to some cache space on the migration server, make the migration software aware of those files, and then go ahead and C-store those along to the target system. One of the things you need to be consider when you're doing a file-based migration is that the DICOM files could have become stale almost immediately. So essentially the study gets archived, and then there's a married name change that comes along, or maybe it was a John Doe. In most cases, the DICOM information doesn't get updated. It only gets updated in the source system's database. So in these types of migrations, it's important to be able to either get a reasonable C-find, but even better, if we can get into the database and pull a detailed extract out of the database so that we're identifying any files that might have been obsoleted over time, or any demographic or study level changes that occur. I say study level, we look for instance level stuff as well, but that's, it's a really great way to do a migration if we can get to that source data. We also do conversion style migrations. The example we have here is SCO to BTO. We do SCO to BTO conversions either as part of a migration or through our workflow engine, where your team could do those yourself just by having having your studies washed through the workflow engine. And we also can leave that behind. You know, one of the things, a lot of folks will convert their SCO to BTO data, but then the next day a patient walks in with an SCO that wasn't on their system when the migration was done. So we generally leave the tool behind to allow you to go ahead and retrospectively process any SCOs that might find their way to your organization post a larger migration. The other things to consider in a migration, you know, we talk a lot about DICOM and image migrations, but certainly key parts of that are results reports, and orders. What we find is in more than half of the migrations, DICOM migrations we end up doing either results or an orders migration. The order that these things happen in are largely dictated by how your target system wants them. Some target systems want to follow the exact workflow that happens every day. An order precedes the images, then the images come in, and then a report. Others, it doesn't really matter. So I think one of the things to consider when doing a migration is, are you going to also move those reports, even if it's just for review? You know, we see that a lot of EMRs are ultimately the repository for this data. However, it's advantageous to have those priors in your new PACS environment or your legacy environment if you're rolling something up. We also occasionally do metadata style migrations whereby we'll populate, say, a VNA with someone's getting away from hierarchical storage, and we'll populate a VNA with all that data, and then what we'll do is a metadata update into the target PACS system, that thereby making those studies available to that PACS system without them having to ingest all that pixel data. We do that for a couple of our vendor partners and have. Scan documents, we see this frequently. It's one of those situations where the customer has had some sort of scan document workflow that maybe wasn't DICOM, but they want to actually store those scan documents in their PACS system. We handle that either by virtue of converting things to a PDF and handing off an index file that allows those scan documents to either be uploaded into an image viewing system, an EMR, or any other really type of scan documents viewing environment. Or what we have the ability to do is convert those to a DICOM encapsulated PDF, add them as a new series at the end of the images, and thereby making them available through the PACS viewing environment. So we're just scratching the surface here on the types of migrations, but what you'll see here are pretty much the most standards. Yeah, so planning is a huge consideration here. Bo focused on 3 elements of success with a migration. I'd say, you know, if there is a 4th one, it's planning, right? Plan your migration and work your plan. It's really important. You know, when we engage, that's one of the first things we do. We take a phased approach to doing migrations, and one of the first things we'll do is review the objectives of the customer and how we're going to achieve those things. There are often a lot of questions that need to get answered, and there's always sort of that one guy at the hospital who kind of knows where all the images are buried, right? So it's always great to talk to that person. They know that they had a tape library that everybody forgot about, for example. But so it's important to know, you know, what's in scope. Is it just a DICOM migration? Is it a DICOM migration and a non-DICOM migration, meaning, you know, scan documents or reports? What are the legacy data requirements? You know, this is a big question. You know, you have customers now, you know, the PACS market is very mature. You have people with 25 or 30 years worth of data that they're no longer required to keep. So it's important to get your migration stakeholders thinking about what they want to keep. What do they want to get rid of? You know, mammos, pediatrics are always the consideration, but also things like legal cases. You know, oftentimes people don't realize that they should have kept some legal cases. So I think it's important to talk about that data retention and how how you can help. Tag management. So, we use that term fairly universally to speak to how we will update the header data of the information that's getting migrated. And we can use that when we're referring to results or images. We do a ton of HL7 migrations, and generally whatever you're doing on the image side, you better be doing on the report side, right? They have to match up. So, and so that's a big consideration. There are times when we get engaged only to do the image migration and someone else is doing the reports migration. We always make a strong point to work with the folks. If we're not doing the whole thing, we'll work with the folks who are doing the reports migration just to make sure that, we're not causing a mess there. We've seen it happen. So it's important to think about that. So again, but back to tag management, through our Silverback engine, we effectively have the ability to change any DICOM tag that exists. That's all the way down to the instance level, right? And this is it's rare that we do a migration that doesn't have some level of tag management. We do a lot of enterprise roll-ups where hospital systems are acquiring healthcare institutions, be they clinics or other hospitals, and we're rolling up the patient IDs, for example, accession numbers. It's important to think about that kind of stuff, because one of the things you'll see is maybe the legacy system had a tolerance for things like duplicate accession numbers, but perhaps the target system doesn't. So you need to look for that kind of information and be prepared to manage those tags, update them in a way that allows the studies to get ingested into the new system without causing a problem. Validation, right? You can't do a migration without validation. We have a variety of validation methodologies, and oftentimes they're driven by what, and you'll find this, they're driven by what the target system can tolerate. Meaning there are many systems where we can get into the database and we write a tool that does an instance level comparison of what we sent, what was on it's effectively a three-way, what was on the source system, what did we send, and what exists today on the target system. Sometimes you're limited to just doing cFind style migrations. cFind validations. So it's important to plan the validation. And I think it's also important to not wait till the end to do it. You should do incremental validations throughout a migration. That way you don't get 40% of the way in only to find out you're missing a ton of data that you believed went successful. It happens. There are things that where a new target system is configured incorrectly, so it doesn't get archived in the way the customer wanted to. So validation is a critical step and should happen early and often throughout migration projects. Infrastructure. It's really important to understand the infrastructure. New emphasis on this as things start to move to the cloud, right? You have a lot of customers that are moving into the cloud. So it's important to understand what it's going to take to actually be able to communicate with the source and target systems. And if you're doing something across a wide area or to the cloud, you need to make sure that the bandwidth exists. Less and less of a problem in 2022 than it was in 2000, but a problem nonetheless. So it's important to understand that infrastructure. Documents other than the documents that we've already talked about. We talked about scan documents, but there are oftentimes other documents that become part of it. Screening forms, mammography screening forms, things like that. It's important to have an understanding of where are they today, and does the customer need to maintain those, and how do they need to view them on the new target system. So again, all part of the planning and customer interaction in the beginning of the project. Inputs. I mentioned the roll-ups where hospitals will go out and acquire a large enterprise will acquire some other hospitals. What inputs are you going to get from the project stakeholders that will allow you to update things like patient IDs, names? Migrations are a great time to really clean up your data if you've got the opportunity to do it. it can be time consuming, it can be a laborious process, and it can put your migration deadlines at risk, but it's a good time to do that. And one of the things that's important is to plan the inputs that will actually support the cleansing and manipulation of that data. What we see a lot of times is customers know they need to do it, but they don't talk to whoever the EMR vendor is or whoever the issuer of patient ID is, and get them engaged early enough to go ahead and perform the type of transition and transformation of the patient IDs for the studies that exist in their legacy systems. Inevitably, what will happen is you will find studies, even if customers have gone through this transformation with their legacy system, you'll find stuff that's just missing enterprise ID. So you need to plan for that and say, okay, I'm going to give you a list of all the stuff that we don't have enterprise IDs for, get a strategy in place for how to deal those. It's important. Interface planning, also important. We use interfaces for a lot of things, not the least of which are prefetch. What we see in migrations oftentimes is customers will want to go live before the migration stuff. They may say, okay, 3 years worth of data, then we'll go live. What I will tell you from doing hundreds of migrations, everybody's happy with that until they only have 3 years. Then 2 days after live, they're asking you for studies from 6 years ago, 10 years ago. One of the nice things we can do with interfaces, as long as we can get an order or a scheduled message, we can go ahead and prefetch those studies that weren't part of that initial 3 years worth of data, and then get those across so that they're available. I mean, the success of a migration, you can migrate 20 million studies in a migration. It's not the 20 million you sent. It's the one that the guy didn't need and didn't have that really determines the success as far as a lot of the end users are concerned. So I think it's important to plan that kind of stuff. Interfaces as well. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Bob, I was just going to add to that, I think that this really shows the complexity around what it takes to pull off a great migration, right? Which is why a team to help walk through and analyze and plan for these kinds of things. If you're not doing migrations every day, all day, there may be some areas here, right, that you need some consulting from our team to help define what you're looking for, what you're attempting to do strategically. And while the tool can do all these things, helping, the fact that we've got a team of folks that can help walk you through these elements becomes really critical to the success of the overall project.
Yeah. So, thanks, Bo. And then, the last thing we have on this slide, again, interfaces, obviously the reports migrations, we can use that to get the legacy reports. We do that with Epic a lot, where we're going to be moving, populating a new PACS system with legacy reports. We can just have Epic replay those, other systems can, right? Internal resources. It's important to share. We try to make a point to do this, is to let the customer, the end user customer, know what we're going to need from them, and let them understand that they're going to have some resources that they're going to make available. One of the challenges is clinical validation. It's tough to get a radiologist to read an exam that he's not getting paid to read. So if you hand them 200 and say, hey, look at these and let me know if they're okay, that takes a little planning, right? All right. One of the questions we get all the time is, how long is it going to take? Everybody wants to know. And this is as many migrations as we do, it's the question that we dread the most, because it's really hard to answer. There are so many factors. We talked about older legacy systems. Some new systems, even though they're super great with the daily volume, have a ceiling on what you can send to them in a day. Oftentimes you're hamstrung by the media that the original exams are coming from. So the only answer around this is to really set expectations correctly. We as an organization do our best to try to meet the customer deadlines, but we also know it doesn't do any good to just tell people what they want to hear. So we try to make sure we set expectations correctly. One of the things Bo's heard me say it 1,000 times to customers is, I don't know anybody who said, boy, I wish I'd have waited to start that migration. And one of the things we do with our Silverback engine is we'll put it in ahead of time. So let's just say you're planning to deploy, your new PACS system in February of next year. Well, we'd love to get in there today and just start pulling data from the legacy system, because we know in most migrations, that's the slow draw. So again, set management expectations, but also create a plan that allows you to get the best chance of success, right? Again, I talked about hardware, new and existing. We see times when customers are not getting all new hardware, and it becomes a little bit of a balancing act. They want to recapture some storage once they've migrated studies, things like that. We have production and test on here. I can't say enough about getting a good test environment early, especially if you're doing a lot of project tag management, or if you're converting data. We get into situations where customer may have in a bunch of old JP2 files and maybe header data that actually needs to be merged back together because the legacy system didn't truly store them as DICOM images. Well, it takes time to do that, but it also, you want to make sure that when you're doing those non-standard migrations that we've allowed enough time and an appropriate environment to do the testing to foster success. Again, always ask the customer early what their relative availability is. Oftentimes data migrations are done in combination with things like, an EMR rollout, and there may be 25 systems going live in one day. We've seen it. So it's important to understand what the customer's availability is to support the migration, and make sure, we as an organization, we're a software shop, but we're also professional services. And, we've got a lot of resources that we can bring to bear in these cases when the customer doesn't have them. But inevitably, when it comes to saying, yes, this data is good or is not good, only the customer can do that. So it's important to make sure that, the customer and your PACS vendor has what it takes to meet the deadlines. And then, prioritization, right? I had mentioned other go lives, but what else is drawing the internal resources away from the project, right? No one's sitting around just waiting to do migrations except us at DataFirst, right? The customer's not. So with that in mind, it's important to understand what other challenges the end users are going to have. All right, we talked about prefetch, and we actually did a webinar a couple months back about intelligent prefetch, and I think this is as important to plan as the migration, especially if it's not going to be done before live. Again, the success of these, you'll hear all kinds of numbers. Only 2% of the studies actually get looked again after 2 years. Well, if you've ever done a migration where you haven't migrated everything before live, you'll think that number's a lot higher because people will be calling you for studies. With that in mind, it's really important to plan a prefetch that works. There are a lot of ways to handle prefetch, and for years we used to handle it in a less intelligent way because we approached it from a migration perspective where we were, well, that study needs to get migrated anyway. So let's just say, Bob Masculiak comes into the hospital for a CAT scan, and I've already had 100 x-rays of my knees. Well, if that CAT scan's in my chest, those knees aren't doing any good. But what we would do as a migration company, we'd say, well, let's just send everything right now, because why wouldn't we? We have to do it anyway. What we found is it's really important to do a targeted prefetch that allows to get the right studies in the end user's hands that are relevant. If time permits, we migrate everything for that patient, but a lot of this is driven by when the trigger occurs, right? The prefetch trigger, the earlier we know, the better. This is relatively easy in the outpatient business where you've got some time, the patient's coming in a couple of days, or in some cases in 6 months, you've got an opportunity to go ahead and prefetch those. But in an emergent setting, you have a lot less time. we can trigger prefetch through Silverback using our either modality work list, or we had mentioned HL7, and that HL7 can come in a variety of different forms. We could do it off an ADT just with the thought, okay, this guy's getting admitted. He's probably going to have some imaging. Let's move the studies. We can do it off a scheduled message, which is great because generally that's the first thing that happens if it's a repeat patient, right? Or we can do it off an order. Oftentimes a little later in the game, right? It might just get ordered on the floor and they're bringing the guy down now, right? The point is the earlier you know about it, the better. So, you know, and again, it's an important supplement to a migration that's not going to be complete at live. All right, Bo, do you want to talk on this?
Yeah. And I'm glad we're getting close to the end here because I see a lot of questions popping up and I think are very relevant. So that was the intent today, is to spend probably more time just kind of addressing questions, specific needs, and how they correlate to the functions that Silverback offers here from a very practical standpoint. But our Silverback platform really is a singular platform. Again, the platform that we use in the course of doing migrations, but in concert with simply just doing migrations, at the core of this is an intelligent router. It's a router that is in fact doing migrations, whether that be into the cloud or into the VNA or to whatever PACS system you might have, multiple PACS systems. But it's also an aggregator of information. It's a system that also alerts you that may fall out of parameters. So if something is down and not operating, or an image hasn't made it to the target, it will alert you to the fact that that has failed. So instead of getting a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from a particular physician, this will alert you by a number of mechanisms to let you know that this has failed. I mean, our goal here was to empower primarily PACS administrators and users with a holistic tool that allows them to manage this world of interoperability that we often hear about in the course of imaging enterprises. It sits as middleware in between a source and target, performs a host of functions, of which we built this kind of webinar series around and showing each of those particular functions. This one function, of course, being migration, which as I said before, we're uniquely qualified to talk about, given that this has been our core business. And this Silverback engine has evolved effectively out of that need to be Switzerland, be all things to all sources and all targets. And when you spend 25 years in the migration world, you get to see and experience a lot. And part of having a development team out of Melbourne, Florida, which is part of our organization, is those things that we see and experience in the course of doing migrations ultimately became the next revision of what our software can do, that we're empowering our clinical users to be the beneficiary of. So we are, as an organization, we are excited over the possibility and opportunity to be exhibiting for the first time in 25 years, really the company's entire history, to be exhibiting at RSNA. I've attended over 30 of them myself, but to be there with this organization, Bob and myself will both be there, as will a host of our sales organization and a number of support resources. So we are both excited in launching this as a commercial endeavor, Silverback as a platform, as a commercial endeavor into the marketplace, both as a complement to our OEM partnerships, but also to direct consumers that see value in what we're doing. We have been overwhelmed with both request and interest in our product, which is a natural progression for us to kind of move and host the exhibit here at RSNA. So if you're going to be there or have colleagues that are going to be there, by all means, stop by, see us. We'd love to sit down and talk to you about the broad aspects of what Silverback can do, and to the specifics that you can bring to the table about your environment. We'd love to sit down and walk you through that. What you can't see here in this booth or on the left and the right side, kind of behind the Silverback, are just an area for a demonstration to occur. We've got a big 55-inch monitor on both sides that we actually sit down. We can kind of walk you through how to configure it, how to set it up, and really work with the specifics that you bring. We also have a little gift that we'd love to give you as a reminder of Silverback and what we're capable of doing. So by all means, stop by. I'd love to say hello to you personally. Again, if you've got the bill for your lunch today, I'll pay for it there. But I think with that, Dennis, is this the time we can move into some of the questions that I see popping up?
Yes, absolutely. If you have a question, go ahead and register either into the Q&A and or into the chat. Any questions that we don't have time to get to today, we'll make sure that we do address those in follow-up and offline. And just momentarily before we get into those questions, I did just post a link to schedule a meeting or a demo on our website. There's a form. You could go ahead and fill that out. If you are not attending RSNA, please feel free to forward that to a person in your organization that is attending. That said, first question that we have is, if we need results in image migration, which goes first?
Yeah, this is Bob. It really depends, right? We can do either first. Oftentimes it's dictated by what your target system wants, right? I had mentioned, I think, Fuji Synapse, we do a lot of migrations to Synapse. Synapse will want us to send in the result first, because as part of that HL7 message, we'll put things in like the procedure code and other things. And what that'll do is that'll then match up with the swatch system and thereby, grab the right description, regardless of what comes in on the DICOM. It also then allows it to appropriately match the display protocols are built. That's just one example. Some systems don't care, and some want it exactly in the order that you would send images, right? You send the order first, send the images, follow up with a result. So I think it's somewhat a preference thing, but oftentimes it's driven by where the exams are going.
Right. If we have multiple sources and or multiple sites with data, can I migrate at all one time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, most of the time that's a byproduct of your network, right? If the Silverback engine has the ability to perform multiple migrations, multiple sources, keep that data segregated, and without a problem. Usually what dictates is just what's your wide area like, right? We see a lot of times where, maybe the wide area might be great to handle the daily bandwidth, but it's just not adequate to do a migration. So we'll do some things where we'll send a truck server out, we'll collect all that data, encrypt it, get it carried back to the main data center. But to answer your question directly, absolutely, you can do it. One of the common examples that we get is someone maybe had everything archived to a VNA, both radiology and cardiology, and they want to now separate that and send the cardiology exams to a CV viewing system versus a traditional radiology. We do those types of migrations all the time. It's really only limited kind of to what your need is. There's really no limit on that.
So do you need to collect all migration data on one server before we move it to another system?
No, so not at all. I mean, for query retrieve migrations, we can affect, if there's no tag management in the mix, which is about never, but let me say that differently. If we have all the tag management ready to go or understand what those rules are, we can effectively start the migration query, if we're doing query retrieve, and send it as soon as we get it. So we can start migrating right away. It becomes a little more challenging when you're doing media migrations. If we're copying off a tape, say, or something, then then there's some value in caching up a bunch of data before you get it going, simply because of the processing time that it takes to get it. But to answer your question, no, we can as soon as we have a study available in Silverback, we can migrate it.
And generally speaking, how long does a migration take?
Yeah, so that's just one of the hardest things we can answer. I mean, we're doing studies that are over 30 million. As you can imagine, they take some time, and then we're doing migrations that are 25 million. So volume is certainly one of the things that dictates it. Legacy infrastructure and case mix, right? Sometimes we'll do mammography only migrations, and what's happened over the last 7 years are those exams have gotten huge because of Tomo or pediatric echo, for example. We have pediatric echoes where an individual exam might be 2 gigabytes. So there are a lot of factors. And we've got sort of a matrix of what we can expect based on what the source and targets are. But Again, it's the hardest question to answer. Even when you're in the middle of a migration, sometimes the speed will change dramatically. You'll have a customer that doesn't know that they've got just stuff on older disk that, you're rocking and rolling at 40,000 a day, and then suddenly you drop down to 18 because you've gotten to some slower sand. So it's really a hard question. If you've got a specific one you're talking about, we could consult on that and give you what our thoughts are anyway.
And we've developed, as Bob had noted earlier, right? So there are methodologies, particularly what we refer to as a hyper or a share-based, that allow us to bypass, depending on the source system, DICOM processes, right? DICOM processes, while kind of gold standard, they've been around forever, they're very chatty, right? And they're very intensive on processing, right? They're very regimented in terms of how they send information, i.e. slow. And we find a greater acceleration when we go directly to where the data is stored and pull the data out as bulk files effectively and convert them into DICOM, right? We see great acceleration around a project where we're able to do a share-based. I see, and Dennis, I'm probably preempting you, but I'm trying to keep track with some of the questions here, particularly about storage being on tape. We have, in fact, started the company 25 years ago by producing what's called a hyper platform, which effectively allowed us to send out an array of media-based drives, either tape, MOD, DVD, and bulk copy that data off of the environment. And then once it's in a spinning disk state, we're able to process and migrate that data far faster than effectively trying to do a query and retrieve from a tape-based system. And the question, Bob, in particular is, I'm just going to read it here. PACS stores lossy images on disk and full DICOM on tape. In general, would you want to migrate the lossy or full DICOM, and how would you approach the tape challenge? We have about 150 tapes going back probably 20 years.
Yeah, so, I would think whenever given the option to migrate the non-lossy data, you'd want to migrate that, your clinicians. Unless you have, if you have buy-in from your clinical staff that it's okay to just roll with the lossy data, you can absolutely do it in a hurry, right? You can finish that thing in short order. No doubt migrating the full DICOM stuff off of tape will take longer, but it's probably the right thing to do depending on what your compliance and retention policies are. Like Bo said, we can do either. We do we can read your tape and handle it that way. So
great. And thanks for grabbing that question. When doing a migration of an acquired site, does Silverback address migration of studies where the patient may be duplicated and have different MRNs and assigning authorities? There's more to the question about. And then the question asks for you to normalize them. Do you have to import a crosswalk of MRNs and write the DICOM headers to all the studies to address?
Yeah, so a couple parts to that question, right? So one of the things we have built into Silverback is when we do a discovery is we have some tools that we run to find that kind of stuff. So if we find duplicate patient IDs that are assigned to different patients, if we find duplicate accessions, whatever. We also have some fail-safes built into Silverback where we actually won't migrate those studies until we've said it's okay to do it by virtue of putting them in a particular migration set. One of the things we run into a lot, which you wouldn't think, but we see it, are duplicate SOP IDs associated with more than one study, and the study's not related at all. We've seen where older modalities will reissue the same SOP ID. So we build all of that into Silverback where it will check for those problems. With regards to how do you fix those things, right? Generally speaking, it does require a crosswalk, or we can come up with a rule set where we can update the IPIDs on the exams outbound. We can do that by virtue of rules where we can identify where that study is coming from inbound based, assuming the criteria is there for us to find. And we can also segregate those into migration sets where we would then prefix the patient ID if that's, if that allows the type of separation that you need. If you're really getting down to it where you truly want to clean it up and get it right, most of the time it does require a crosswalk input. So what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll interrogate either at the database level or by virtue of CFind, and we'll come up with a distinct patient list that we find in there, and we can turn that over as an input to whoever is going to produce that. Now, if you already have one, a crosswalk, we just take it, we match it up. Anything that falls out, we tell you about. But at some point, the only way to do it might be a crosswalk. But again, if you can do it with rules or other things.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Guys, we're coming down to the kind of the end of our time allotment here. Again, thank you everybody for dropping on by. If we did not get time or an opportunity to answer your question in real time, we will make sure that we capture the chat and get back to you and take it offline. Bo, if you want to go ahead and have some final remarks for our attendees to wrap up the webinar, I'm going to pass things back over to you.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to tackle that last question.
Oh, go ahead.
Pop-up that said, can you migrate different lengths of time per modality? For example, mammos, all of mammos, and a defined year, maybe 5 years of MRIs.
Yeah, so that is Bob. That's absolutely we can. We do that all the time, right? Again, part of the planning process is we'll talk about what you want to keep, what do you need to keep. And then we've got the ability to segregate that stuff based on dates, right? You really have pretty much ultimate control of what does or doesn't get migrated. And again, as long as we understand the rules, we can put that in place.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll start wrapping it up. Then it's just I wanted to thank everyone for attending. This by far was the largest webinar that we've done. I think it's indicative of the interest, the need, and the importance of migrations in the world that we live in. And they're inevitable, right? They're going to happen. If you haven't done one, you're going to be doing one at some point in the history of your organization. And having a tool and a team behind you that spent 25 years developing it is, I think, important to your overall success. And not just to be in a single swim lane here, but Silverback is much more than a migration engine, as our booth references. It's clearly the strength of what we do, but there are a lot of elements that come with Silverback as a component of our workflow engine that are equally as powerful, and I think equally as important in the ever-growing world of complexity of imaging environments, where we see all kinds of interoperability challenges. I mean, in many ways, they're snowflakes. Every environment we get involved in has a unique attribute or a unique challenge or problem that needs to happen. It's not necessarily a source issue or a target issue, but it is an issue nonetheless that's impacting the efficiency of your organization, or the workflow at some point is challenged. I would challenge each of you, if you're going to be at RSNA, come see us. There's not a problem that we haven't seen, or a tool or an element within Silverback that's capable of addressing it at some level, and we'd love an opportunity to show you that. And again, I want to just thank everyone for taking an hour out of their day to kind of see us. Come by, say hello. If we didn't get to your question today, by all means, we will have that in our chat, and we'll have answers out to you. And if you want to see Silverback in operation and you're not going to RSNA, then just send us an email link. We can set that up immediately, give us 30, 45 minutes, and we can kind of run you through. And then lastly, as a quick pitch, if there's anything about Silverback that you find intriguing, we've all been at companies where promises were made and perhaps not delivered. We believe in giving you the software and let you try it out before you buy it. It's just one of our mantras about what we feel is important in this organization, the culture we're trying to build here. So again, thank you for your time. Any questions, hit us up. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you or hearing from you soon.
Thanks, everyone.